At the moment when the system failure finally severed my connection with this world and killed me, Liu Ruyan was completely absorbed in caring for her mentor. She had no idea that, deep within the manor, I had met my end while she was straining every ounce of her strength to save another. An endless series of cold nights and barely perceptible glimpses of warmth followed one another, as if in a daze. I felt this cycle continue until dawn the next day when the illness finally receded and he, my rival, the man to whom she was devoted, was on the mend. In that moment of ignorance, he suddenly realized, coming to his senses, that I was still locked in that damp, lightless basement where I had been left to die. Was my new life really meant to end so absurdly? He asked the butler bitterly, but the butler only backed away, his voice trembling, his eyes darting from side to side, obscuring the truth of what had happened. The butler, barely holding back his sobs, whispered the terrifying words, "Mr. Fu, he's dead." Then, turning to Liu Ruyan, who was entering the room, he added pleadingly, "Liu Ruyan, please don't leave him, don't abandon him at a time like this." I wanted to scream, I wanted to break free from my shackles, trying to shout to her, warning her not to take this step, to stay, but my voice was only an echo in the void, devoid of physical embodiment. Liu Ruyan always seemed to me the embodiment of tenderness and kindness. She grew up side by side with this man, and their bond was something sacred, something that could not be destroyed by simple outside interference. They were called the green plum and the bamboo horse. Inseparable since childhood, they were made for each other. Liu Ruyan loved this man with all her heart, and this feeling was the only constant in her life. I always entertained the illusion that he reciprocated her devotion with equal intensity, but life is cruel. I did not expect that even the strongest attachment of childhood could be defeated by the fate ordained by heaven. When that very heroine burst into our lives, literally falling right into the arms of fate, Liu Ruyan couldn't bear the blow. Her world, where only he existed, began to crumble like a house of cards. The thought of hurting the hero was unbearable for her, and all the pent-up hatred, mixed with unrequited love, ate away at her from within. And my own self, trapped within the confines of this book 7 years ago, was slowly going mad from the realization of its helplessness. My task was to be the one who would hurt her, who would challenge her loyalties, so that then, at the right moment, she would turn her gaze to me. I had to make her love me so that the system would allow me to survive. I did everything I could to be there for her during her darkest times, comforting her when she cried, saving her from despair, and helping her heal the wounds left by the loss of her mentor, in the hope that she would see me as a support. She made me a promise, a ghost of a chance at happiness, when she promised to try to reciprocate my feelings. Today was supposed to be the culmination of my attack on her heart, as she almost decided to abandon her teacher for the sake of our future. But as soon as her teacher sent the message, everything collapsed. I made a fatal mistake by passing it on to her, and now my heart was clenched with unbearable pain, foreseeing the collapse of all my efforts. Despite my pleas, she walked toward him, unwilling to listen to logic or my arguments. No matter how much I begged her to stop, no matter how much I asked her to come to her senses and let go of the past, she remained deaf to my calls. Then her voice rang out, cold, devoid of any warmth, as if an icy wind had pierced the room. "There are not and cannot be any feelings between us." I felt humiliated by these words, as if I were nothing but a void. "Don't forget that you're just a shadow, a replacement for Song Cheng," she continued. "You're worth nothing in this world." But she herself had given her word, she herself had promised me her love. She pushed me away sharply, cutting off my excuses mid-sentence. "Know your place and remember who you are," she snapped at me, her gaze filled with a cold contempt that made my insides twist. "I'll leave as soon as I sell my last dignity, Liu Ruyan," I cried out, unable to contain my emotions. "You will still be everything to me." I embraced her one last time, lost and broken, casting aside the last of my male pride and humbly begging her to stay. "Please, I beg you, don't go," I whispered, feeling reality slipping through my fingers. "You will die if you take this step, you will die if you choose it now." Liu Ruyan laughed again, and the sound was so coldly cruel that it made me shudder. She snapped at me, "Reincarnation? What are you even talking about? Do you think that if I leave, you can threaten me with your own death by committing suicide?" I gritted my teeth. Even if I truly decided to end my life, it wouldn't touch her icy heart. Liu Ruyan was deaf to any of my attempts to justify myself. In her eyes, I ceased to be a person. I was nothing more than a convenient way to kill time, a temporary replacement she had once assigned to me simply because I was handsome. She gave the order, and her men unceremoniously grabbed me, locking me in a tight embrace from which it was impossible to escape. I was paralyzed, completely at the mercy of her will. Liu Ruyan ordered me bound and thrown into the basement, that very dungeon where the darkness became almost tangible. Liu Ruyan gave me a cold look, ordering me to consider my behavior as if I were a guilty child. While the villa's maid tightened the knots on my wrists, I watched as Liu Ruyan, without turning around, hurried away, leaving me in complete isolation. The basement was completely dark. I knew this place well. It was here that Liu Ruyan locked herself whenever she was overcome by bouts of madness due to her illness. It was her sanctuary of pain, fueled by her obsession with her teacher. Every time she began to rush about in her thoughts about her mentor, trying to contain her feelings or, conversely, find a way to get to him, she locked herself here, losing her mind so as not to harm anyone or to hide her weakness. For the 7 years I was by her side, I acted as her human shield. I protected her from herself, kept her from being harmed, and because she couldn't vent her anger on the one she loved, all her cruelty and rage fell upon me. After each such episode, when she finally came to, I felt half dead, as if all my strength had been drained from me. They say human cells are completely renewed every 7 years. In those 7 years at her side, I shed my skin, but inside only ashes remained. So 7 years is enough to forget one person? I suddenly laughed bitterly, realizing the irony of the situation. At that moment, I sensed that the mistress of the house, Liu Ruyan, was already on her way. She accompanied her teacher, who was suffering from a high fever, to the hospital. A sharp system alarm sounded in my head. The mission had failed, and now, as a failed player, I was about to be erased from this world. I frantically whispered to the system that I had 2 more hours. Perhaps this was my last hope. The system responded indifferently, confirming that if Liu Ruyan returned to me within 2 hours, the failure would be reversed. I just shook my head sadly, feeling my insides sinking. No, I whispered to myself, this won't happen. Liu Ruyan will always choose only Song Chang. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't melt the ice that had frozen her heart. I wasn't fooling myself, it was the bitter truth. At midnight, when hope had finally faded, my soul, without a shadow of a doubt, left this mortal coil. I prepared to return to hell, believing my fate was sealed. After all, each of us attackers was merely a descendant of God, given a dubious chance of survival in this game. There was no second chance, but my soul, it didn't vanish. It hung in space, a ghostly witness. The punishment for failure proved more painful than death. My soul was doomed to wander this world forever until the one I was supposed to attack dies. The system registered my departure indifferently, leaving me in the void. It was already searching for a new host, a new pawn awaiting its turn to replace me. Left alone, a disembodied soul, I could no longer control my impulses. Like an invisible shadow, I darted into the hospital, burst into the ward, and there, once again, I saw Liu Ruyan. Her deep, inexpressibly melancholy eyes fixed on Song Chang, who lay in a coma. She remained by his side all night, refusing to close her eyes even for a moment, as if afraid the world would collapse if she turned away. I saw her fear. She was afraid she'd close her eyes and never see him alive again, afraid of missing this moment of intimacy. When Song Chang finally opened his eyelids, I saw Liu Ruyan flinch slightly in surprise. "Why are you here? You sent me a message," Song Chang muttered, stunned. At that moment I realized the message I'd sent wasn't addressed to him but to Xia Liuliu. That was my last mistake in this life. I hovered over them like an invisible shadow and saw Liu Ruyan's face momentarily light up with bitter disappointment as she realized the message hadn't reached its destination. But surprisingly, there was no anger in her. On the contrary, a forced, barely perceptible smile played on her lips as she said, "Don't worry, I'll help you contact her." "Thank you," Song Chang replied, and this short exchange struck her like a knife. Liu Ruyan immediately dialed Xia Liuliu's number, and just as she was about to leave, Song Chang himself rang, addressed to someone else. Liu Ruyan was tense to the point of breaking point. Her fingers trembled as she tried to conceal her nervousness. Around this man, she always lost her usual confidence, becoming frighteningly cautious and fragile, even now that the illness had finally receded. "Live happily with him," Liu Ruyan said quietly, and in that moment I saw something inside her finally break. She tried to appear indifferent, but in her eyes, filled with indescribable pain, I read something else. She was willing to endure any torment, as long as Song Chang didn't feel even a shred of psychological pressure from her. She didn't want him to see her suffering. After being discharged from the hospital, Liu Ruyan returned to the villa, where an oppressive, almost tangible silence reigned, oppressive like heavy silk enveloping every corner of the house. She sat on the sofa for a long time, unable to move, still reeling from the shock of that encounter in the ward. It wasn't until midday that the housekeeper, noticing her condition, timidly offered her lunch, but Liu Ruyan merely shook her head distantly, not uttering a word. Then, as if casually, she asked in an icy tone, "How is Mr. Fu now? Is he still in the basement?" The housekeeper, lowering her voice, replied, "Yes, madam. I am following your orders, no contact and no concessions." There was no argument between them, only a cold silence. Liu Ruyan stared into space, her gaze seemingly clouded. And in the villa, despite the housekeeper's sternness, everything remained eerily quiet, no life, only the echo of other people's orders. "Do I need to go and ask him something?" the housekeeper asked cautiously. Liu Ruyan replied sharply, almost cruelly, "No need, leave him there, let's see how long he can hold out in this darkness." The housekeeper didn't dare object, and what could I say? I clearly understood that in Liu Ruyan's eyes I had no dignity left. When the system first chose me for the role of attacker, I was nothing more than a tool in someone else's hands. Entering this book world, I was perfectly aware of my status. I knew the rules of the game. If I failed to gain Liu Ruyan's favor and complete my mission, my existence would be erased and I would die forever. Anyone who's once known death becomes terribly cautious. So to get close to her, I planned every step. I deliberately made my appearance and mannerisms a bit like Song Chang's, and then staged that very accident to put myself within her sight. I invented an entire biography, the story of my parents, to make myself seem real. In fact, in the original plot, no such figure as me existed. In this world, I was a single, artificial ghost, created for a single purpose. Over time, I stopped thinking of my mission as an attack. I simply wanted to survive. I ached to feel alive again, like a person with a right to my own self. I dreamed of having a family, of knowing what caring was, and of truly loving myself at least once in my life, because in my present life, I was terrifyingly lonely. Ironically, I truly fell in love with Liu Ruyan with all my heart. Despite how much she despised me, despite the fact that her every word was poison, I still sought warmth in her. Even when she caused me unbearable pain, I chose forgiveness again and again. At times, I couldn't figure out whether it was love or whether I'd simply completely confused my goal with reality. I almost forgot that I was here only to complete a task. If not for the cold system notifications, I would have long since lost touch with this quest. Every time she insisted on accompanying Song Chang, my heart would pierce like a sharp blade. I watched her sit at the table, elegant, flawless like a queen, and I realized once again that for her, I existed somewhere on the periphery. It seemed there was no room for resentment in her heart. I convinced myself that it would soon be over, that I would soon meet her on equal terms, and that this reconciliation would be my salvation. I pretended everything was fine, playing my part to the end. And then, suddenly, my memory helpfully brought back a memory of that day, 6 months ago, when we found ourselves on a yacht together and fell into the water together. For a brief moment, it seemed to me she looked at me as a person, not as a replacement. In this unfortunate story, there were always people willing to resort to any baseness to frame Song Chang. When he was deliberately pushed into the turbulent waters, I rushed after him without a second thought to save him. But in the chaos, no one even noticed my actions. In their eyes, I was nothing but a nuisance. We both found ourselves in the icy seawater, plunging into chaos. Ironically, Song Chang, despite his abilities and high status, was completely unable to swim, and I, equally helpless in the elements, floundered nearby, trying to stay afloat. When Liu Ruyan learned of what had happened, she jumped into the water without a moment's hesitation. But her path was predetermined. She didn't even glance in my direction, rushing straight for Song Chang. Seeing her distance herself from me as she tried to save him, I was certain at that moment that this was the end. The sea would take me without even a moment of her attention. Fortunately, fate decreed otherwise. A rescuer pulled me out of the depths in time, returning me to the surface when I had almost lost consciousness from cold and despair. Immediately after I was brought back to my senses, I met Liu Ruyan's gaze for the first time. A shadow of guilt flickered in her eyes, almost imperceptible yet palpable. Though she didn't utter a word, that silence was louder than any excuse. I didn't blame her for the choice she made, but the pain of her indifference remained etched in my memory forever. For a long time, I managed to maintain my composure, convincing myself that everything was getting better. I believed that if Song Chang didn't make any mistakes this time, things might get better between us. With this bitter feeling of regret, I suddenly caught myself with a frightening thought. How would she feel if she saw my lifeless body? What would her expression reflect? Most likely, only the cold indifference she was accustomed to. The villa was unusually quiet that night, the silence ringing in my ears, reminding me of the emptiness that had settled within these walls. In her office, Liu Ruyan, as always after returning from Songcheng, immersed herself in work, trying to drown her thoughts in endless reports and contracts to drown out her boredom. She devoted all her time to her work, and it was precisely this obsession that skyrocketed her career. It was the only place where she could allow herself to forget her goal and her teacher. Her fingers methodically tapped the keys, creating a mechanical rhythm that filled the room. Suddenly she froze, crouching down as if in sharp pain, then rose heavily and headed for the window on the landing. Beyond the glass lay impenetrable darkness, into which she peered for long minutes, as if trying to discern the answers to questions for which there were no words. After an infinitely long time, Liu Ruyan pulled out a cigarette. The smoke billowed into the air. It was her only outlet, her way of burning away the anger that had built up within her while trying to forget Song Cheng. I'd been watching her for too long not to understand the true reason for this ritual. I gave her my every thought, every particle of my soul, so even the slightest change in her expression, even the faintest hint of emotion, was no secret to me. I sensed that she was more irritated now than ever, an irritability directed at herself and everything that connected her to the past. She saw the man she loved, and the feelings in her heart raged like a hurricane. Having finished one cigarette, she immediately reached for a second, trying to dull the unbearable agony with the smoke. At that moment, the door slammed open. The butler, without waiting for an invitation, entered the office, carrying a cup of hot milk and a piece of pie on a tray. "Madam, please eat something," he said, then added, "Mr. Fu asked me to give you this." Liu Ruyan looked at him with a sarcastic expression, her lips twisting into a bitter smile. "He asked, are you sure?" she asked, but the butler only shook his head in denial. "No, Master Fu didn't ask, he doesn't even know." I suddenly remembered, after all, I sent her messages every night, trying to somehow remind her of myself. "I brought these myself, madam," the butler admitted. I saw a glimmer of defiance flash in Liu Ruyan's eyes. "Zuki baked the cookies and Master Fu helped her the day before," he added, hoping to soften her heart. "I've tried to reach you many times," the butler continued. "I brought this last night, please try it." Liu Ruyan didn't even glance at the tray. "Take it away, I don't need your sympathy." "Madam, don't you understand what I'm trying to say?" the butler persisted. Liu Ruyan, barely containing her anger, snapped, "Yes, I understand. Just put the milk and cookies on the table and go out." And again, when he was already at the door, he could not bear it. "Miss, I can't remain silent. Mr. Fu is still in the basement. His life is fading away, and you haven't even looked in his direction." "He hasn't eaten or drunk for almost 2 days, madam. I'm seriously worried about Master Fu," the butler insisted, but Liu Ruyan merely glared at him. "That's his own business," she snapped, her voice tinged with iron. "If he's decided to defy me, trying to manipulate me with his hunger strike, then let him die in this basement. He chose this path himself, insisting on living by my side. I want to see how strong his bones are," she added with frightening coldness, "and see exactly when his pride breaks." After these words, she said something so harsh and humiliating that my insides clenched with pain, even though I hadn't given her permission to speak of my feelings that way. The order was clear: no one was allowed to even approach the basement, under penalty of dismissal. The butler was so enraged by Liu Ruyan's cruelty that he caught his breath and didn't dare utter even half of what he wanted to say in my defense. Bowing his head, he was forced to leave silently. Once Liu Ruyan was alone, she attacked her work with even greater ferocity, as if trying to destroy the remnants of the world we had been connected to. She returned to her computer, working at a maniacal pace, displaying complete indifference to the rest of the world. "Why am I still waiting for something?" the thought throbbed in my head. "What will her reaction be when she finds out I'm gone? I should have given up long ago." The night was growing dark, but Liu Ruyan had no intention of going to bed. Her inner fire demanded sacrifice. She tugged at her hair irritably, her fingers tangling in the strands, but I, invisibly present, saw how she hesitated to remove the hairpin, my gift, which she still wore like a mockery. I used to be the one who helped her prepare for each day, becoming part of her rituals. I always followed her schedule, choosing her clothes, making sure everything was perfect when she woke up, helping her get ready. I was her shadow, her faithful servant, and as it seemed to me, her closest person for those long 7 years. There were days when I even helped her with her hair, taking care of every detail. Over the years, I'd grown accustomed to being her support, but now, looking at her, I realized a bitter truth. She'd become so accustomed to my care that without me, she seemed helpless even though she tried to appear stronger than everyone else. She jerked her head back again and the sudden movement caused her feet to slip off the chair, which hit the floor with a deafening thud. At that moment, the silence was shattered by the sharp, insistent ringing of the telephone. She flinched, her expression changing. The caller's tone was heavy, commanding. "Hello, this is Song Cheng," came a voice that could make her heart beat in unison with his. As soon as this man appeared, I saw Liu Ruyan transform. All the anger, irritation, and coldness that had filled her until that moment evaporated, as if they had never been there. A tenderness such as she had never bestowed upon me appeared in the depths of her eyes. In Song Cheng's presence, Liu Ruyan instantly changed. She never allowed herself to become angry in his presence. She unleashed all her bad temper, all the rage she had accumulated throughout the day, on me, even though she knew he had essentially rejected her. She silently endured any pain just to remain in his shadow. As soon as he called, she was ready to ascend to heaven, forgetting all her grievances. "What happened? Is something wrong?" Her voice now sounded soft and submissive. She asked with such concern that I felt sick. Song Cheng, however, seemed completely lost in his own thoughts, oblivious to her agitation. Liu Ruyan calmed down, her breathing evened out, and she became the perfect listener. She deftly changed the subject, trying to hide her nervousness. "It's so late. What's wrong with me that I can't stop thinking about you?" She didn't even wait for his answer, her voice trembling with the tension she'd so carefully concealed from him. "How are you feeling? Has your fever gone down?" She peppered him with questions. "I'm calling to let you know I've been discharged. The doctor said I'm fine." She desperately tried to pretend everything was fine just to avoid burdening him. "The weather is deceiving right now. It's easy to catch a cold again. Take care of yourself." Her words conveyed a level of concern I, locked in the basement, could never have hoped for. Liu Ruyan was ready to give him all the warmth I so desperately needed. "I know," Song Cheng replied coldly, but immediately added with a hint of gratitude, "You were so eager to help today, thank you." Those words meant more to her than anything else. "I just didn't have time to thank you sooner," Liu Ruyan said, clutching the phone so tightly her knuckles turned white. I looked at her and couldn't understand why she was giving herself so easily to this man who didn't even understand the depth of her sacrifice. She was afraid to be around him for too long, afraid her feelings would become a burden to him. She preferred to suffer herself, choosing me as a lightning rod for all her unspeakable pain. And then Song Cheng suddenly remembered something important. Song Cheng paused slightly before saying, "Tomorrow will be my 26th birthday. I hope you can come to my party. I'll be glad to see you there." Liu Ruyan gripped the phone so tightly that her fingers turned white and her heart skipped a beat at the unexpected invitation. "I didn't want to throw a big celebration, but Liu insisted we celebrate," Song Cheng continued, his voice soft. "Are you free tomorrow night?" Liu Ruyan barely found the strength to answer, "Yes, I am free." There was a brief pause before Song Cheng added, "Excellent. Just please remember to bring Fusheng with you. I remember that last time on the yacht, he suffered greatly while saving me, nearly drowning in the sea. I still haven't had the chance to personally thank him for that deed," he said. Liu Ruyan hesitated for a moment, her face darkening, but she couldn't refuse this man. How could she object to the one who was the meaning of her existence? "It's late, time for you to rest. See you tomorrow." Song Cheng said goodbye. She stared at the phone for a long moment, as if trying to hold the echo of his voice in her hands, knowing she'd have to put on a show in front of everyone tomorrow. Liu Ruyan put the device down, but her gaze remained fixed on the void for a long time. In truth, she knew it was high time to give up, to stop chasing the ghost, but every time she took a step back, fate tethered her back. Even just seeing Song Cheng's name on the screen was a torment for her, a mixture of adoration and deep, unbearable pain. Who am I really to him? This silent question echoed in her mind as she tried to find her place in this life. I hovered invisibly beside her, watching her every movement, every breath. When the smartphone screen went dark, Liu Ruyan suddenly jumped up, as if the very thought of inaction had become unbearable, and hurried out of the office. The butler and the other servants, hearing her footsteps, retreated in fear. Liu Ruyan, stopping on the second floor, said in a cold, commanding tone, "Go and tell Fusheng that he's leaving the basement tomorrow. If he admits his mistakes and promises never to be jealous or foolish again, I might allow him back into the house," she ordered. The servants hastened to obey, not daring to ask unnecessary questions. I laughed bitterly, though it was merely a silent vibration in the air around her. Liu Ruyan had no idea her words were merely mockery of the dead. I was deeply disappointed. Do you really think that after everything that happened, I can simply forget my pain for the sake of your comfort? I knew that even if she caused me even more suffering, I, bound by my mission and love, would still seek a way to her heart. With this heavy realization, Liu Ruyan returned to her office, closing the door firmly behind her. Despite Song Chang's invitation, her mood had been fickle. Now that she had been tasked with seeing him, she became calmer, almost serene. Later, the butler, plucking up his courage, knocked on the door again. When he entered, I saw in his eyes not just concern, but genuine animal terror. He must have already gone down to the basement, opened the door, and found the room empty, and I was no longer breathing. "Miss, what you're asking, it's pointless," he muttered, stuttering with fear. Liu Ruyan, without looking up from her papers, interrupted coldly. "What is it? Isn't Fusheng obedient enough to carry out my orders?" Liu Ruyan asked without a shadow of a doubt. "So what's wrong with Mr. Fu? Why isn't he answering?" She laughed, but there was no joy in the sound, only the familiar icy mockery. "Still playing his games with me? Let him continue, it won't save him." There was a deep falseness in her eyes as she looked at the butler. "Tell him, if he continues to behave so provocatively, I don't know what I'll do to him," she added menacingly, unaware that her words were spoken into thin air. "Even if he starves to death in this basement, it won't change my mind," she muttered through clenched teeth. The butler trembled, his voice dropping to a whisper. "But madam, Master Fu is truly dead. He can no longer hear you." I watched Liu Ruyan's reaction with interest, expecting at least some flash of emotion on her face. But in her gaze directed at the butler, I found nothing but irritation. I felt a strange pity for her, but immediately pulled myself together. My pity could make me too soft, make me forget how coldly she had destroyed me all these years while I was trying to be her only one. "Miss, please hear me. Master Fu is truly dead." The butler's voice trembled, a mixture of horror and despair. "I just went down to the basement and checked personally. His body is already cold, his skin is numb, he shows no signs of life." Liu Ruyan froze, staring at the butler with a piercing, almost crazed gaze, as if trying to detect any falsehood in his words. The butler, without averting his gaze, repeated with genuine anguish, "Mr. Fu, this is not a game, this is a terrible reality that I myself cannot believe." But even now, denial and rage warred within her. She simply couldn't accept this fact. Rising abruptly from her chair, Liu Ruyan stormed out of the office, the hem of her robe fluttering like black wings. The butler, barely keeping up, rushed after her. We descended into the basement, a place of eternal darkness. The air here was heavy, permeated with damp and the smell of decay. I stood in the shadows, and like a disembodied being, I saw my own motionless body visible on the concrete floor in the dim light of the butler's lamp. The rope with which I had been bound now seemed a meaningless accessory of death. After my death, my soul was forever chained to her, like a chain. It was my first glimpse of myself from the outside, a pale face, frozen features, a complete absence of life. I tried to discern details, but everything blurred, as if the very nature of my ghostly existence was failing my vision. "It's like he just fell asleep. Fu Shen, stop pretending, it's not funny anymore." Liu Ruyan's voice sounded unnaturally clear and cold in this basement. She was still waiting for me to open my eyes, stand up, and hang my head guiltily. "I'll count to 3 and you'll get up immediately," she threatened. My memory of yesterday, her taunts, flashed back, and I couldn't help but chuckle. Until now, she'd been absolutely certain I was simply leading her on for attention. She was convinced that I, like a faithful dog, would come running to her at the first sign, wagging my tail with joy if she beckoned. 1, 2, her voice grew heavier, laced with suppressed anger and mounting anxiety. She stared at my motionless corpse in rage, waiting for me to flinch. "Fu Shen, don't be so shameless, stop this farce," she shouted, unable to contain her irritation. Liu Ruyan clenched her teeth until they hurt, her fists clenched. 3, she thundered, but my body remained impassive, like dead stone. Her eyes filled with an unbearable red gleam. It wasn't fear, no, it was anger, pure as amber, because for the first time in my life I dared to go against her will, even at the cost of my own death. "Miss, he really isn't breathing," the butler whispered, but she wasn't listening anymore. "Go and tell him, if he doesn't emerge from the basement by this evening, don't expect my forgiveness." She threw over her shoulder and, without looking back, strode away as if I'd simply punished her with my silence. This heartless woman, I saw her back and couldn't believe such cynicism. She didn't even deign to give me one last glance to confirm the truth of the butler's words. For her, my disobedience was more important than the fact of my death. My soul, as if tethered, followed her, seeping through the walls as she climbed up. She returned to the bedroom, where her movements were abrupt and nervous. Several times she tugged hard at the hairpin I had once given her, and finally, in a fit of irritation, she threw it on the floor. She walked into the bathroom. The sound of running water drowned out her thoughts. She took a quick shower, eager to wash away this strange, heavy night, and out of habit, without thinking, she called out, "Yijin, bring me some clothes." Without waiting for an answer, she roughly tore off her robe, hastily dried herself, and put on silk pajamas. She lay down on the bed, and I saw her body tense under the covers. She turned off the light, closed her eyes, and almost immediately fell asleep. It was so easy to forget while I lay in the basement, turning to ice. Soon, her even, calm breathing could be heard. My death hadn't touched a single chord in her soul. The next morning, the alarm clock rang, an annoying, obnoxious sound piercing the silence of the bedroom. Liu Ruyan winced, half asleep. No one was rushing to turn off the alarm. She was clearly irritated. "He's late again. How dare he let me listen to this noise? Let him sleep for another 10 minutes, the lazy bastard." The alarm continued to howl. "Fu Shen, are you dead or something? Turn it off." In her sleep, angry at her own helplessness, she muttered, "Yes, I'm dead. Dead to you, since you make me so angry." The alarm sound grew increasingly unbearable. Liu Ruyan finally shook off the last of her slumber, rose furiously from her bed, and silenced the noise with a single click. In the silence, she slowly turned, her gaze falling on the side of the bed where I usually slept, expecting to see me, but was met only by an empty, perfectly made bed. The moment the bright light came on in the bathroom, Liu Ruyan was once again confronted with emptiness. The bed was perfectly made, and there was no sign of my presence. She tugged the edge of the blanket irritably, as if expecting me to jump out from under it, but was met only with silence. She clenched her fingers, holding back her anger, and tried to suppress her growing anxiety. She threw the blanket onto the floor and began hastily tidying up the bed, trying to occupy her hands with anything to keep her mind off the silence in the house. Afterward, Liu Ruyan went to the bathroom and then to the dressing room to choose her outfit for the day. She tried on one thing after another for a long time, but nothing seemed quite right. Today was Song Cheng's birthday, and she had to look flawless. She wasn't a traditional beauty in the traditional sense, but she possessed a cool, austere aesthetic that always drew attention. Her figure, petite and elegant, seemed even more graceful in the black dress she had finally chosen. Her porcelain-white skin contrasted with the dark fabric, creating a look that was impossible not to fall in love with at first sight. Standing in front of a full-length mirror, she studied her reflection for a long time. A feeling of dissatisfaction persisted. She adjusted the belt on her shoulder, tucked it under her arm, but the result still seemed too dull. Unhappy with her look, she changed her costume twice before finally leaving the dressing room. Then she began applying her makeup, her movements precise, as if she were painting a mask on her face to conceal her pain. As she descended the stairs, she saw the butler waiting for her at the bottom, looking pale and frightened. "Madam, Master Fu, is he still in the room?" he asked uncertainly. "No, it's Mr. Fu," she snapped, unwilling to even mention my name. "Don't pay any attention to him. If he's determined to die in his stubbornness, so be it." "Let's go," she commanded, heading toward the table. She didn't even give the housekeeper a chance to continue the conversation. The poor woman sighed heavily, realizing the chill of death had settled in this house, and, having no choice, obediently followed her. Liu Ruyan remained silent throughout breakfast. As soon as she left the villa, my soul, invisible and tethered, followed her. The first item on her to-do list was the company, where mountains of paperwork awaited her. She was immersed in her work, trying to drown out the ringing in her ears until her smartphone, lying on the table, suddenly rang. It was him. "Ruyan, are you here yet?" came Song Cheng's voice. She froze, her thoughts instantly turning to her birthday. She never forgot it. It was her only religion, her only meaning. Now she began to blame herself for every lost minute. "We'll be there soon," she promised, her voice laced with pleading. "We'll be waiting for you." Putting her phone down, she left the office and dashed to the party. The drive became a mad dash. Watching from the sidelines, I couldn't help but think that even death couldn't rid me of the fear that she might perish in this absurd rush. When we arrived, the party was in full swing. Song Cheng, noticing Liu Ruyan, smiled warmly and walking over, took her hand. "Ruyan, you're finally here." "Sorry, I'm a little late," she whispered, handing him the gift. "This is for you. Happy birthday." This gift was already in the car. I myself had once helped her choose it, out of habit instilled in me by years of our collaboration. She prepared them every year with such meticulous care, as if her life depended on it. Song Cheng accepted the gift and opened it with a smile. Inside was a piece of precious wood that Liu Ruyan had once bought at auction for him. She remembered every casual word he'd ever said, every wish he'd ever uttered. To find this gift, she traveled to the best teachers, searching for something that could give him peace before his upcoming wedding. I knew she couldn't be the one to give him complete happiness in marriage, but she hoped that the Buddhist pearl she gave him would bring him peace, even if he himself ever chose another. Song Cheng, momentarily frozen in surprise, asked Liu Ruyan with a hint of remorse and genuine interest, "Ruyan, where did you get this piece of rare Tang Maju wood? It's incredibly rare." "I heard they were planning to auction it, but when I checked, I was told someone had bought it before the auction even started," he continued. "I never expected to see him here. Did you do this for me? He's truly the light of my life." "Thank you, Ruyan. You always understand me better than anyone." His voice was full of gratitude. I looked closely into Liu Ruyan's eyes and for the first time saw in them not the usual coldness, but a spark of warmth, that very grain of love she so carefully hid from the world. "By the way, I wanted to personally thank Fu Shen for what he did on the yacht," Song Cheng suddenly added, looking around. "Why isn't he with you today? Where is he?" The question came like a bolt from the blue. Liu Ruyan was suddenly speechless. She froze, her lips pressed into a thin line, and she remained silent for so long that the silence that followed was almost palpable. "What happened? Did you have a fight?" Song Cheng asked worriedly. It was crucial to him that Fu Shen, the man who had saved him twice, harbor no ill will or anger toward them. "Perhaps you're somehow to blame. I'm truly sorry if you offended him," he continued. Liu Ruyan couldn't find the words to protest. "Listen, Ruyan," the man said. "Fu Shen is the best person I've ever met. He deserves the utmost care. If you lose him, you'll regret it for the rest of your life." Song Cheng spoke with such fervor that even I, a disembodied shadow, felt uneasy. He was sincere in his concern, and that stung more than any accusation. I couldn't help but smile bitterly. The irony of fate was that even Song Cheng himself was upset that Liu Ruyan and I weren't a couple, sincerely wishing me happiness with the one who kept me in the basement. "I've never seen anyone love a woman to such a degree of self-sacrifice," he added, referring to me. "Even I, as your rival, can't help but admire his devotion. It's some kind of mad, almost base form of love." "Some people in his place would fight for you, would prove their case," the man continued. "But Ruyan, Fu Shen loves you so much that he is ready to tolerate any of your antics. There is only you in his heart, and he even does everything to help you be happy with another. Tell me, how much more can a person endure before he breaks?" These words pierced me right through. I didn't know the answer. At first, my only goal was to stay close to her, to satisfy her whims so that the system would allow me to survive. But over time, this turned into a painful habit, an addiction that became my very essence. Love truly is blind. I paid for every moment with her, giving myself completely just to see even a hint of joy on her face. "Ruyan, don't be obsessed with the ghosts of the past," Song Cheng gently admonished her. "Don't wait until it's too late to ask for forgiveness." His voice grew serious. "Fu Shen deserves sincerity, not your handouts." He looked at the gift Liu Ruyan had prepared for me, and his gaze was filled with deep sadness. He then carefully placed the Buddha's pearl back into the box and returned it to Liu Ruyan. "I appreciate your gift very much, and I am grateful for your consideration, but this pearl is not mine. It should belong to Fu Shen." Liu Ruyan stared at the pearl in her palm as if it were burning her skin. "Today, I wanted to thank him personally," she whispered. "I've prepared everything to please him." She pulled another small box out of her bag. The man took it and opened it. Inside was the very tie I'd once asked her to choose with me when we were pretending to be a happy couple. I remembered the price of this tie. It had been ridiculously low, and I hadn't dared buy it then, considering it a waste. But now, looking at it in the man's hands, I understood. She had chosen it not because of the price, but because I had once pointed it out. This tie was an attempt to match her style, to make us look like a couple. From the moment I entered this story as the attacker, my entire being, my every breath and thought was consumed by her, Liu Ruyan, the only woman who never knew that I loved her even in my final hour. I never had an ego. I dissolved into her, I thought, listening to their conversation. Song Cheng, looking closely at Liu Ruyan, asked a direct question. "Fu Shen didn't even ask you to buy this for him, did he?" Liu Ruyan's body tensed as if struck by a whip. She merely nodded silently, unable to hide her inner confusion. "You've been together for so long," Song Chang continued, his voice filled with genuine bewilderment. "But have you ever given him anything from your heart? You've always been spoiled by his attention, but what has he ever gotten in return?" I listened to this and I became unbearably sad. I was her boyfriend, her shadow, her support, but she never saw me as her equal. Even without work, I dedicated my life to her home, her comfort, her whims, without expecting a penny or gratitude. "How could you allow him to live in such emotional poverty?" Song Cheng's words were dead on target. Liu Ruyan stood there, seemingly impeccably calm and pure, but beneath that icy facade raged a storm she was still trying to tame. Her quiet voice barely wavered. "He really never asked me for anything. And it was true. I was too proud to ask and too loyal to demand. I remained silent until the very end." "You simply didn't think it was necessary to treat him like a human being," Song Cheng remarked coldly. "I value Fu Shen because he loved you so modestly, so carefully, that it bordered on self-sacrifice. How could you consider that normal?" "Fu Shen is also a living person," the man continued. "Just because he's silent doesn't mean he doesn't feel pain." Liu Ruyan merely lowered her head, her fingers nervously clutching the hem of her dress. She couldn't deny the obvious. I recalled how she would dismiss me with irritation, how she would look down on me, and this memory brought only bitter sadness to my soul. "Ruyan," Song Cheng said seriously, "this man deserves to be treated fairly. Go home," he ordered. "Apologize to Fu Shen. The party will last until evening, and I hope you'll come back and appreciate him." Liu Ruyan froze, unable to move. She didn't want to leave. She had so little chance to spend time with Song Cheng, and the thought of leaving him for me was torture. "This is for me," she thought, looking at the man who didn't even realize the depth of my devotion. I watched this hesitation and felt self-pity mingle with a bitter smile at our fate. "Okay," she finally exhaled. She was more afraid of upsetting Song Cheng than losing me, so she agreed, though her every movement betrayed her reluctance to leave this room. We drove off. She got behind the wheel, and I could see how hard every mile was for her. She hadn't driven herself in a long time. Perhaps it was a subconscious reluctance to return to a house where only the cold awaited her. I thought she'd turn off the road, find an excuse to return to him, but she drove straight to the villa. She drove as if in a daze, every kilometer separating her from the ideal world she wanted to build with him. The drive home seemed endlessly long and slow. He land, she, and other images flickered in the windows, creating a strange contrast to her state. Once she would have found this evening heartbreaking, but now she felt as if in a trance. When we returned to the villa, she immediately saw servants carrying something wrapped in black out of the house. "What's going on here?" Her voice rang out like a shot in the silence. Liu Ruyan was furious. The butler and the others rushed out to greet her, looking terrified. "Madam, this is Master Fu's body," someone whispered. She froze, her face contorted. "Is the play still going on? Is this still your performance?" She was beside herself with anger, unable to understand why they hadn't waited for her return to act out this finale. In her mind, I should still be sitting in the basement, awaiting her verdict. "Where is Fu Shen?" she screamed. "He's in the basement." "Madam, we were preparing him for transport," the steward replied haltingly. Liu Ruyan didn't listen. She rushed into the basement, her footsteps echoing in the stone corridors. She flung the door open without stopping and walked over to where I lay. I saw her eyes filled with a wild, inexplicable denial of reality. She looked at me, unable to comprehend that the blood no longer flowed in my veins, and that an abyss had just opened in her own soul that she could never close. The butler, his hands trembling, finally took hold of the ropes to untie me. After all, I was dead, and keeping my cold corpse in shackles was pointless sacrilege. I watched from the sidelines, hovering in the dim light of the basement, and saw Liu Ruyan enter, holding her head high and proud, as if she still hoped to take complete control of the situation. She froze, looking at my pale, lifeless face and unnaturally tense body, which had already begun to stiffen. "Fu Shen," she said, and her voice, despite the obvious tragedy, still held an icy coldness, the familiar tone of a mistress scolding a negligent servant. "Get up," she commanded. "I'm not going to play your games anymore, and I'm not going to save you." Looking at my motionless body, I couldn't help but grin. Her words sounded like a cruel mockery of death itself, with which it was impossible to negotiate. Did she really think I could rise, or was this her last, desperate threat, to force me to submit even after my heart had stopped forever? "Madam, please stop," the butler suddenly exclaimed, unable to bear this absurdity. He stood next to my body, his voice rising to a scream, but Liu Ruyan seemed to be in another dimension. "He won't die," she said decisively, and a mad light flashed in her eyes. "I didn't allow him to die, which means he's alive." The butler fell silent, his eyes lowered. He understood the hopelessness of the situation, but arguing with her madness was futile. Ultimately, even he couldn't find the words to break through her wall of denial. There were no visible wounds, signs of struggle or violence on my body. I simply faded away, having exhausted my life resource, and this quiet death seemed to only irritate her more, giving no reason for righteous anger. "Fu Shen, you promised, you wanted to marry me, remember?" Her gaze was fixed on my glassy eyes. Yes, I really had dreamed of this. I would have given everything for these words to one day become reality, but now they sounded like an echo from another world. At that moment, like smoke dissipating in the wind, my connection to the world of the living became even more illusory. She turned away from my body, and I felt the cold of the basement pierce me through and through. The cold air seemed to envelop her from all sides, but she continued speaking, not noticing that I could no longer hear her. "Fu Shen, don't be so stubborn and modest, it doesn't suit you." "You said you'd try to love me," she whispered, a hint of vulnerability finally creeping into her voice. I remembered those rare evenings when she'd return drunk and I, loyal as a dog, would wipe her body, give her honey water to drink, and endure her barbs. I remembered that moment. I was serving her and she suddenly looked at me as if she wanted to crush me, grind me into dust because I saw her weakness. I've decided to try to love you," she said that evening. I wrote them down in my heart as the highest reward, not knowing it was just a temporary impulse of her ego. I so craved her attention, so wanted this love, but then, in response to my hopes, she coldly snapped, "I don't like you at all." Those words cut me deeper than any blade, and my breath caught in my throat with sadness. From that day on, Liu Ruyan grew even colder, and I fell silent, no longer daring to dream of the impossible. "I don't dare repeat it again," she continued, looking at my corpse, "but I congratulate you, you have won. You got your way," her voice wavered. "I've decided we're getting married." I would have laughed if I could. It was the most bitter confession I heard, just when I no longer needed it. She talked about marriage, about the future, and I watched from the sidelines, feeling neither pain nor joy. I thought this was the last, cruelest joke she had decided to play on my memory. "Get up, stop pretending." Her voice became quieter, almost pleading. "We're going to go buy wedding rings now, do you hear?" But her words dissolved in the emptiness of the basement, where all that remained of me was a cold, silent shell. "Go choose the most beautiful wedding dress," she whispered, addressing my cold body. "You asked me to bring this as an offering to Buddha, but I took it back. It will wait for you. It is priceless, like everything you have done for me." She listed the gifts Song Chang had once given me, trying to convince herself that these were exactly the gifts I wanted. "That tie, that watch, that limited edition pair of shoes, we'll buy all of these for the wedding, just like you wanted, right?" Her voice trembled as she continued to list the details, as if I wasn't lying dead on the floor, but simply hiding, playing the silent game, and she was about to persuade me to leave this game. It was the most terrible day of my life, even after life had left me. She treated me so condescendingly, so basely, that I wanted to scream in pain. Maybe I was wrong, maybe she wasn't so indifferent, or is it just my imagination clinging to the illusion of hope? Liu Ruyan, trying to convince herself of the reality of her words, turned to the housekeeper to confirm her insane theory. But the woman, with tears in her eyes, quietly said, "Madam, Master Fu really is dead." "He won't marry me?" Liu Ruyan hissed, her face contorted with a sudden surge of rage. "Shut up, he can't die until I say so," her eyes bloodshot with impotent rage. She was ready to tear the housekeeper apart for that single mention of death. "He won't die," she repeated like a mantra, clutching her shoulders. "I didn't let him go. We're not married yet, he can't just leave me like that without finishing our conversation." She stubbornly denied the obvious. The housekeeper, seeing her mistress's complete derangement, didn't dare argue any further. With trembling hands, she merely handed Liu Ruyan a small, tattered notebook. Liu Ruyan frowned and took it. "What is this?" "This is Mr. Fu's diary, madam. I found it when I was packing up his personal belongings." I watched it from the sidelines and my ghostly soul shuddered. This was my diary, the only place where I dared to be myself, where I recorded my fears and the loneliness I had carefully hidden from her all these years. I wrote there how my heart sometimes broke with pain, how I tried to maintain the mask of the perfect partner so that Liu Ruyan would be happy. I never wanted her to see these lines. It was my only secret refuge. Liu Ruyan's fingers trembled. She opened the notebook to the first page. Date, April 4, 2016. Today I accidentally opened a book and the system told me I was dead, she read aloud, her voice trembling. It chose me as its attacker. If the attack succeeds, I can live again. If it fails, I will die forever. Liu Ruyan froze. The diary clearly stated, if the attack fails, I will die again. She began to understand that my life was just a game, the rules of which she had no idea. Next came the entry from April 10, 2016. I saw the target. He looks miserable. He has everything, wealth and status, but he seems so lonely. He is the only person in this world who is truly alone. Liu Ruyan read, and for the first time, her eyes reflected not anger but confusion. In my diary I wrote, this reminded me of my past life. I too was completely alone. I described that nightmare. When I was born, my father was rushing to me and was hit by a train. My entire family blamed me for his death. My mother hated me, my grandparents despised me. I grew up with my grandmother, the only person who loved me, but in second grade she was hit by a car. I was left all alone. Liu Ruyan's voice became quiet, almost invisible. I wrote about how I was considered a disaster, how those around me whispered that I would kill anyone who came near me. This was the life I never revealed, even to her. The last entry she read, under legal pressure, my mother took me in. She married another man, and that man had a son who was 5 years older than me. The story of my humiliation and loneliness finally appeared before her eyes in all its cruel truth. My torment began long before I became an attacker. The family my mother forcibly took me into had a daughter. They spoiled her, showered her with attention, and I was nothing but a nuisance to them. She often bullied me, knowing I was defenseless, and one day I simply couldn't keep quiet any longer. I decided to tell my mother about her antics, hoping for justice, but she slapped me across the face so hard that my vision went black. "Are you a man?" she screamed, looking at me with disgust. "Do you think you look like a victim? She'll torment you until you learn to be a real man. Do you have any idea how hard it is for us to support you?" she continued, ignoring my excuses. "Let me save up a little money and then shut up, and don't you dare complain again or you'll be thrown out on the street." My childhood was filled with fear and the endless wait for the moment when I could finally escape. Even under the pressure of daily bullying and mental abuse, I gritted my teeth and endured everything until I entered college, seeing education as the only path to salvation. I escaped that hell, but after I graduated, my sister, like a demon haunting me, reappeared, demanding money and attention, taking advantage of the fact that my mother still had power over me. For 2 long years, I tried to buy my way out of it, trying to live my life, but she wouldn't leave me alone. When I couldn't stand her antics anymore, an incident occurred that led to her arrest. But my mother found out and came running to me in a rage. She beat me, cursing me and calling me a heartless, dishonest brat who couldn't repay his family. She forced me to go to the police and withdraw my complaint, and in that moment I realized there was nothing left in me but cold. Before her eyes, I stepped from the roof of a tall building into the void. My past life ended there, on the asphalt, turning into an eternal nightmare that haunted me even in this bookish world. "Today is the last time I remember this horror," I wrote in my diary. "From now on, I want to start all over again with that woman named Liu Ruyan." I so desperately wanted to believe that redemption awaited me. April 16, 2016, I decided to have plastic surgery. The system gave me resources and I used them to change my appearance. The process was excruciating. The surgical knives cut through my flesh, but I felt that broken self fading away with every drop of blood. July 20, 2016, my face was restored. I began to resemble Song Cheng, the man she idolized. Looking in the mirror, I saw not myself, but the perfect bait I had created to try to win her heart. I headed towards her group and staged that accident. As I lay bleeding on the pavement and saw her eyes filled with shock and guilt, I realized, this is the beginning. It hurt, but it was all worth it. July 30, 2016, I was discharged from the hospital and effectively moved into her villa. She took me in and I was happy, although I soon realized I was living in a house permeated by the ghost of another person. I saw her taking medication for a serious illness, how she suffered yet still sought a way to be near Song Cheng. It broke my heart, but I continued to believe. One day she would emerge from this shadow and notice me. April 4, 2017, a year had passed and I still hadn't been able to touch her soul. She loved him. She loved him so devotedly that my efforts seemed like a drop in the ocean of her obsession. October 3, 2017. Today is Liu Ruyan's birthday. I baked a cake for her, I decorated the house, I waited for her all night, but she didn't come. She stood at Song Cheng's door, afraid to even ring the bell for fear of disturbing his peace. April 4, 2018. 2 years have passed, the entry read. She still doesn't love me, no matter how much effort I put into it. To her, I'm just a convenient decoration. July 13, 2018. Liu Ruyan is working hard to secure her future, but I understand that this is all just a way to distract herself from the fact that her heart does not belong to me. Every line in this diary was filled with hopelessness. Liu Ruyan turned page after page, her face growing paler with each word. She had seen the story of a man who died before he met her, a man who had willingly chosen the path of suffering for the sake of her illusory love. And now, standing over my body, she understood. She hadn't just been indifferent, she had been the one slowly killing me all these years. I learned to be discreet but helpful. I made sure she ate on time, even when she herself was suffering from stomach aches from stress. I began cooking for her every day, pouring all my tenderness into it. Every time I saw her finish the food I prepared, my heart filled with quiet joy. It gave me the illusion of warmth. I felt at home, as if we were a real family, not two strangers connected only by my mission and her indifference. I really want to be with her, I wrote in 2019, not because the system demands it, but because my soul is drawn to her. 3 years have passed since this madness began. Liu Ruyan still loved Song Cheng. The system reminded me of this daily, as if branding it into my consciousness. I pushed myself to the limit, worked, tried, but to her, I remained just a convenient addition to her life. February 15, 2020. I've truly fallen in love, I admitted to myself. Seeing her suffer because of him breaks my heart. Falling in love with Liu Ruyan wasn't hard at all. The hard part was accepting that I'm nothing to her. She became my savior, my only ray of sunshine, even though she didn't know it herself. She was the one who gave me a chance to live a second life, even if this life was full of pain. I dreamed of being her savior in return, of snatching her from the clutches of this unrequited love. I dreamed of our home, of silence, of children, of a world where we could simply be happy. But reality was cruel. On December 25, 2020, on Christmas Day, when it started snowing, she threw me out into the street. Song Cheng had a fight with Xia Liuliu, and Liu Ruyan, in a fit of panic, rushed to console him. I was left with nothing, no phone, no money, in thin clothes, everything forgotten in her car. I walked home, freezing to the bone. When I walked in, she was surprised, but even then she chose to maintain an icy distance. I remained silent. What was there to say? I didn't blame her. I knew she was broken herself, because that day Song Cheng had once again chosen Xia Liuliu over her. She returned from him, and her pain was so acute that she simply couldn't bear to see anyone else. April 4, 2021, 5 years. Should I give up? I asked the pages of my diary. I don't want to die, not only because I'm afraid of the end, but because I so want to stay with her. 2022 was a year of silence. I didn't keep a diary for a whole year. I had nothing to say. 6 years in this world, and I was still a nobody. June 19, 2022, she was drunk, the recording read. For the first time, she said she would try to love me. The system pinged. I was so close to success. October 13, 2022, I fell into the sea trying to save someone she cared about. Xia Liuliu and Liu Ruyan pulled me out, but I was on the brink. When I woke up in the hospital, she was there. For the first time, she didn't leave. I was distracted, almost forgot about her betrayal, about how she was abandoning me. During those days when I was in a coma, she was there. I clung to her like a lifeline. Even though she once rejected my proposal, I felt a change. I became accustomed to being near her, accustomed to waiting for her, even knowing that at the end of the road only emptiness awaited me. The system shows 15 days left, I wrote in the final lines. My delivery time was running out. I was no longer actively searching for a way to win. I realized it didn't matter whether I succeeded in my strategy. If I succeeded, I could stay here forever in this world where she walked, breathed, and sometimes, very rarely, looked at me with a shadow of pity. Liu Ruyan finished reading. The last page was blank, save for stains like water droplets, the tears I shed when I realized that, in dying, I had finally become more than just an attacker to her. I had become a reflection of her that she would rather never see. The last entry in my diary was filled with a strange calm. I just want to live this life like an ordinary person and die one day. I look forward to the future where I might be with Liu Ruyan. The words trailed off there. It was my final wish, written on a day when I still believed anything was possible. I watched as a huge, heavy tear fell from Liu Ruyan's eyelashes and landed on the yellowed page of my diary. Did she feel guilty? Surely. But I, now floating in the void, felt only a strange detachment. The pain that had burned me for years suddenly vanished, leaving only a cold emptiness. Before, I would have given anything to see those tears. But now I looked at her, the woman who had been my only world my entire life, and felt nothing. I saw before me a person who had suddenly found herself completely alone, and this sight no longer evoked either pity or anger. Perhaps death really does free one from shackles. I truly let go. I dreamed that after death, my soul would finally be able to leave this mansion, this basement, this endless cycle of subjugation to Liu Ruyan. I didn't want to be a part of her life anymore, even as a ghost. I can't stay here any longer, madam. Forgive me. The butler's voice trembled as he gathered his courage to break the silence of the basement. In all his years of service, he had never seen his cold mistress shed so much as a tear. I have someone to live for, and I can't allow myself to end up like you, he added, packing his things. Liu Ruyan merely flinched in response, her voice hollow. Get out, I'm letting you go. The butler bowed without looking back and left, leaving the two of us alone in this deathly silence. He carefully closed the heavy door of the passage behind him. Left alone, Liu Ruyan suddenly sank to the floor next to my body, her proud posture vanishing, replaced by a vulnerable, hunched stance. Her slender, trembling fingers reached out to my face. She touched my cold, frozen cheeks. She didn't know what I was feeling, but her hands touched me with a tenderness I had never seen in all the years of our life together. Wasn't she afraid? My body was icy, rigid, devoid of any spark of life, but she stroked me as if I were a porcelain doll. Suddenly, she burst into tears. The sound of deep, crushing depression filled the cramped walls of the basement. I had never heard her cry like that. I always thought women cried differently, but it was the same devastating sadness that breaks anyone. She cried as if her own life had stopped with my breath. In life, she looked right through me as if I didn't exist. Now that I was just a shell, she looked within me for answers. But who was she looking at, me or that phantom, ideal version she'd imagined for herself? Fu Shen, she whispered, and the name was so tender it sounded like a spell. Until the very end of her life, in this silence, she called out to the one who was willing to die for her. Fu Shen, wake up, please don't sleep. She squeezed my icy palm with her hot fingers. Let's get married, do you hear me? Let's do it right now, just like you wanted. I'll agree to any wedding. I'll never look at Song Cheng again, I swear. I only want you, understand? Only you, Fu Shen, don't leave me. She sobbed, pressing her forehead to my chest where my heart no longer beat. How can I live without you? Fu Shen, you can't do this to me. I listened to her and thought, is this an illusion? Is this just the remorse of someone who has lost a faithful dog? Even if I had been just a dog to her, her death would have been difficult. But she was a living person, and her despair seemed frighteningly sincere. I didn't expect her to become like this, a broken, lost person whose existence suddenly lost its meaning without the one she always considered only her shadow. She fell in love with me when I stopped breathing. She saved her feelings for someone who was no longer there. Fu Shen, her voice faded into the darkness of the basement until eternal silence reigned around me. My mission was accomplished, but the price was too high. In the stifling darkness of the basement, she continued to call my name over and over again. Her voice broke and turned into a muffled croak. Anyone who happened to wander in would have thought she'd gone mad with grief, mourning the dead. But the irony of fate was that I, the very man who loved her until his last breath, was now simply floating silently in the air just beneath the ceiling. I was a disembodied shadow. I gazed blankly down at Liu Ruyan like a devoted dog guarding my corpse all night long. No matter who she called to, the dead man couldn't answer. When morning came, the heavy basement door creaked again. The butler, who had been preparing to leave yesterday, finally came down. Perhaps a simple human pity had stirred within him. He was genuinely afraid that Liu Ruyan would simply die here, on the cold floor next to me. Madam, Master Fu's body. The butler hesitated, choosing his words, but harsh reality demanded action. If you don't allow him to be moved to the refrigeration chamber, I'm afraid the process of rotting will begin very soon. He had to remind her of the laws of nature. In truth, arguing with biology was futile. I too turned my gaze to my lifeless body. My skin had completely paled, taking on an earthy hue, and the suffocating smell of decay had barely begun to spread throughout the room. At that moment, Liu Ruyan's pupils began to move wildly. She was still kneeling before me, but her expression suddenly changed. To my surprise, there was no violent outburst. "Okay," she said quietly. Miss Liu Ruyan suddenly became frighteningly, unnaturally calm. This calm before the storm was more frightening than any shouting. She grieved and cried all night and apparently decided she'd had enough. I watched her slowly rise from the icy ground. Her legs were numb, her body swayed violently, and the butler and the servants who had approached had to catch her under the arms to keep her from falling. But Liu Ruyan abruptly, disgustedly, pushed the steward's hand away. She turned on her heel and strode quickly out of the basement, not even glancing back at the place where my shell remained. There were no more tears in her eyes, a ringing emptiness reigned there. I followed her like a tethered balloon, completely unaware of what was going on in her fevered mind or what she was planning to do next. "Don't move the body, leave everything as it is," she snapped at the servants as she walked. Then she turned sharply left, heading for the stairs. I could only wonder, my God, what was Liu Ruyan up to this time? Can't she just let me die? Don't I have the right to even the most basic peace after everything I've been through? My soul obediently followed her into her spacious, cold office. The first thing she did was grab the phone from her desk and dial her personal assistant. "Prepare the wedding for me immediately. Make sure everything is ready by tomorrow," she commanded icily. The assistant on the other end of the line, judging by the long pause, was taken aback by the shock and tried to object. Liu Ruyan cut him off in a rage, shouting, "The registration and banquet will be right here in the villa. Hurry!" Then she slammed down the phone, breathing heavily and raggedly. But that was only the beginning of her madness. She began making one frantic call after another. She called partners, acquaintances, the press, demanding that absolutely everyone show up for her wedding the following morning. Watching this chaos, I was finally convinced Liu Ruyan had lost her mind. Tomorrow's wedding, but the main question remained. Who the hell is she going to marry if I'm dead? And then she dialed Song Cheng's number. As soon as he answered, she said dryly, "Song Cheng, I'm getting married tomorrow." On the other end of the line, the protagonist's sincere, joyful cry rang out. "So fast? Ruyan, this is simply unbelievable. So Fu Shen has finally forgiven you. I told you yesterday that he's the best man in the world and he loves you madly. You must never, do you hear me, never anger him again." "Yes, he really is too good for this world," Liu Ruyan replied, a creepy, barely perceptible smile tugging at her lips. I mentally waited for her to add her usual line, "But he will never compare to you, Song Cheng." After all, in her mind, no one could ever be better than him. But she remained silent. Instead, Liu Ruyan simply hung up, cutting off his congratulations mid-sentence. Apparently, she decided this call was her way of ending things and giving their past relationship one last chance to die. What a cruel irony! Before Song Cheng could celebrate her own wedding, Liu Ruyan decided to stage her own farce. After this conversation, she didn't waste a moment. No intermediate steps, no hesitation, she threw on her cloak and swiftly left the villa. My ghostly gaze followed her around the city. I watched her again with maniacal meticulousness choose a formal men's suit, a luxurious wedding dress, wedding rings. When the car returned to the villa, the servants had already transferred my stiffening body to a special refrigeration chamber to slow the decay. Liu Ruyan entered, boxes in hand. I closed my ghostly, unreal eyes, unable to watch as she began to pull the wedding suit over my corpse. I watched the scene with a horror I couldn't express in words, a ghost. I felt as if I'd gone blind or insane watching this nightmare. Liu Ruyan had seriously decided to marry me, but I was dead, just a piece of cold meat. She was planning to perform a wedding ceremony with a corpse. I tried to imagine what would happen tomorrow, but I couldn't. My mind refused to comprehend the scenario. Liu Ruyan had finally crossed the line of reality, turning her life into a grotesque tragedy. However, the morning brought only confirmation of her madness. The wedding had not been cancelled. Strings of guests streamed into the villa, including Song Cheng. He looked genuinely joyful, unaware of the hell he had entered. Song Cheng found Liu Ruyan immaculately dressed in a dazzling white wedding dress. "Where is Fu Shen? Why are you here alone and not with your groom?" he asked with a smile. Liu Ruyan merely shook her head, her face as white as chalk. She turned slowly and pointed to the far corner of the room, which had been transformed into a semblance of an altar. There, among a profusion of white lilies, stood a coffin, disguised as an elegant bed, which the guests initially mistook for decoration. "Is Fu Shen there?" the host whispered, sensing something ominous. Liu Ruyan merely nodded. The host, his face turning pale, walked forward and she followed him, her footsteps echoing in the ringing silence of the hall. The guests who had followed them curiously suddenly froze. The room became so quiet you could hear the clock hands ticking away. Everyone was shocked to realize that the hotel was an open coffin containing my body, clad in an expensive suit. Ruyan, what does this mean? Is Fu Shen? The host's voice trembled with superstitious terror. Liu Ruyan stared at him blankly, not responding. Song Cheng, standing nearby, looked confused. He couldn't understand why I wasn't moving, why there were so many flowers around, and why the air smelled not of celebration but of decay. Why had everything changed so suddenly? Whispers began to circulate in the crowd. Someone, unable to bear the absurdity of the situation, muttered, "But he's dead. Why is she planning a wedding with a dead man? Is she crazy?" A fury blazed in Liu Ruyan's eyes, threatening to engulf everything around her. None of the guests dared utter another word. Only Song Cheng, mustering up his courage, asked, "Ruyan, why are you doing this? This is abnormal." "Because Fu Shen wants to marry me," she replied icily, looking straight at my corpse. I, an invisible witness to this nonsense, nearly vomited at the realization of how low she had fallen. "I'm dead," I screamed into the void, but my voice was just wind. "Please, just let me rot in the ground, no need for these elaborate ceremonies." But my pleas were pointless. Song Cheng fell silent, stunned by her fanaticism. The other guests were petrified with fear. And so the wedding went, one living man, one broken woman, and one dead body in the spotlight. The host, barely suppressing a tremor in his voice, asked the ritual question, "Miss Liu, are you ready to marry Mr. Fu Shen, for richer or for poorer?" "Old or dead, I will never leave him," she interrupted, looking straight into my glassy eyes. "I will love and protect him forever. Until death do us part, I am ready." Liu Ruyan added with a frightening smile, "Death will not separate us." I smiled bitterly. "So you plan to follow me into the grave?" According to the script, the host was supposed to ask about the other party's consent, but he hesitated. Liu Ruyan answered for me, "He's ready, so am I." She took the ring, slipped it onto my numb finger, and leaned down to press her lips to my cold ones. It was the most disgusting feeling I'd ever experienced. The ceremony came to an end, sealing this insane union. I hoped this nightmare would end at least now. But suddenly, breaking the ceremonial silence, uniformed men entered the hall, several police officers, whose faces promised nothing but the end of this absurdity. The sudden appearance of the police shattered the deathly silence of the villa. The guests began to retreat in panic, forming a human corridor. Liu Ruyan, who had been in some kind of trance until then, suddenly found a frightening calm. She watched the approaching police with cold curiosity, as if she'd been expecting this outcome from the very beginning. Who had called them? Someone present must have been unable to bear this theater of the absurd. Liu Ruyan stepped forward calmly. "I killed a man," she said, her voice ringing out in the silent hall like a death sentence. The atmosphere grew so thick it felt like it could be cut with a knife. "Who exactly did you kill?" the policeman asked, pulling out the report. Liu Ruyan slowly pointed her finger at the coffin where my body lay. "Fu Shen," she answered without a shadow of a doubt. The officer, after examining me, merely sighed heavily and ordered her to be taken to the station. She was led away in disgrace from the wedding, which had turned into a funeral. At the police station, she meekly confessed to everything as if it were a release. The police seized my body for forensic examination. The autopsy lasted a long time, but the results were inconclusive. No direct fatal injuries or signs of poisoning were found on the body. The official cause of death was ruled a heart attack due to chronic exhaustion. Liu Ruyan was found not guilty of murder, as it was impossible to kill someone who had already collapsed from pain. However, her confessions and insane actions led to charges of desecration of a body and disturbing the peace. She was sentenced to 7 years in prison. My soul, still attached to that reality, followed her into the gray walls of a prison cell. I watched her for 8 years, 7 years of her sentence and another year of cloaking in my thoughts. She cursed her fate, and I looked at her with detachment. Who was truly pathetic, the one who left or the one left to rot in her own guilt? 7 years in prison with Liu Ruyan were an endless, monotonous torture. I watched her once proud demeanor crumble, turning into a shadow of her former self, constantly muttering my name into the empty walls. I waited for her to understand. You can't atone for your sins by continuing to play the victim. My death wasn't a lesson for her, but an endless rain that washed away the remnants of her sanity. It was a crime not only against me, but against life itself. After her release, the first thing she did was go not home, but to the cemetery. She fell to her knees before my grave, her fingers trembling as she touched the black and white photograph on the granite. "I'm sorry I'm late," she whispered, and there was more truth in it than in anything she'd said in the years of our life together. She was asking for forgiveness from someone who had long since stopped waiting. "I thought they'd execute me right away," she grumbled to herself, "but I survived to come to you." She looked like a broken doll, devoid of any purpose. "I'm here with you, Fu Shen. I won't leave you again," she said, drawing a hidden knife. With one sharp, expert motion, she slashed her wrist. Blood gushed onto the cold stone of the grave. She felt no pain, only smiled for the first time in 7 years, truly. I floated in the air, watching her go with the same calm as watching a boring movie. Death erased all boundaries and feelings. She was dying, defiling my peace with her blood, but at that very moment the system, long silent, echoed in the void. The attack target has been eliminated. Status complete. My soul shuddered with long-awaited release. Liu Ruyan was dead. The curtain had fallen. Now I was free from this insane scenario. Would I be able to return to normal existence? My soul, as if sucked into a black hole, began to disintegrate. The system's sound, familiar and cold, pierced my consciousness. "Congratulations, you have successfully completed the mission. You are returning to the real world." "See you next time," the system's voice rang out. I winced. "Next time? Are you kidding me?" But the space around me was already gone. I began to forget her face, her voice, the scent of lilies at the wedding. Reality began to seep through me like light through glass. I woke up in a different place, a completely different person, innocent and free. Only occasionally, looking at my reflection in the window, did I catch myself with a strange feeling, as if in a past life I had already died, committing suicide for the sake of a woman who learned to love me only after I ceased to exist. I stood before the grave, feeling the cold of the headstone seep into my bones. It felt like everything around me was just a backdrop, hiding a true emptiness. I returned to that moment again and again in my thoughts, standing before what remained of the man I had destroyed. Blood spurted from my wrist, staining the white snow crimson. I laughed, looking at this bright, almost festive color. Finally, I knew he was there in another world and I could finally follow him. How absurd and empty had my life been up until this moment? I lived in blindness, unaware that a feeling had long since settled in my chest that I mistakenly took for indifference. I loved him so much that it became my only reality. Leafing through the pages of his diary in my memories, I saw lines where he called me his ray of sunshine. I was his savior, the only person who gave him a chance, and yet I was the one who coldly took his life. My guilt was bottomless. 7 years in prison didn't break me, they merely sharpened my awareness of my mistake. I didn't want to give up on death. On the contrary, every day behind bars was preparation for this finale, my only way to atone for my guilt. Looking back, my only regret was that I'd called the police instead of following him right away. But all this time, I was waiting for the day when I could get out of prison, finish what I started, and be by his side forever. Standing by the tombstone, I peered at the familiar features in the photograph. It suddenly became vitally important to me to know, who was he before his life turned into this endless dream? Who was he in the world from which he came? What was his true face? What lay beneath the mask I'd forced him to wear? My vision blurred, reality began to fade like smoke. The death I'd so feared now felt like a soft blanket. Suddenly, the fear vanished. My soul, with a gentle jolt, separated from my dying body. It turned out that death wasn't the end, but merely the removal of a heavy, uncomfortable mask. But where was Fu Shen? I darted around in the void like a headless fly, peering into the endless layers of reality in search of that single spark that belonged to him. And then a figure appeared before me, its nature woven from static and digital noise. The system. "Congratulations," boomed a voice devoid of emotion. "You have been selected as an attacker." I froze. "An attacker like Fu Shen?" I asked, my heart, if the soul has one, beating faster. "I don't want to be an attacker, I just want to find him. Where is he?" I vehemently refused. What good would a rebirth be if he wouldn't be in it? I demanded only one thing, to bring him back or let me go to where he was now. The system replied coldly, "You can travel to his worlds to find him, but to do so, you must become an attacker." I hesitated for only a split second. I was willing to do anything to meet him. "I agree," I shouted before the system could finish the question. "I agree to everything, just send me to him." The next moment, the world around me exploded with bright light. My soul, previously chaotic and frightened, suddenly took shape. I found myself inside someone else's story in a world that seemed strangely familiar. "Are you ready to attack a human?" The system's voice whispered right in my mind. I couldn't care less about the details of the mission. "I don't care who I attack," I replied, "just tell me where he is." The system responded, "The former Fu Shen is here now, disguised as this master. Good luck." My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't wait to meet him. I saw him in the distance, in a form I'd never seen before, but I'd recognize him among 1,000. Was this his true, original form? He was incredibly handsome, full of dignity and that deep sadness I had once so shamelessly ignored. But between us stood another woman whose figure blocked my view. Excitement washed over me like a tsunami. I took a step forward, unable to contain the impulse, and called his name. My heart trembled. I had finally found him, and now no force in this universe would make me let him go again. "You're mistaken," she said coldly and calmly, looking me straight in the eye. The depths of her pupils revealed undisguised indignation, mixed with an irritation I still couldn't understand. "His name isn't Fu Shen at all, and you have no right to call him that." I wanted to object, to explain that he was him, my only goal, my purpose, but the words stuck in my throat. She suddenly moved toward the girl standing next to him. A gentle, almost maternal smile appeared on her face, one that had never been intended for me before. I watched as she, this knew her, closed the distance. She gently hugged the girl by the shoulders. The gesture was so possessive that it physically hurt me. I couldn't hide the surge of jealousy. The girl, sensing my gaze, turned and looked at me with undisguised curiosity, tinged with a desire to prick. "Who is this man?" the girl asked, nodding in my direction. "I don't know, I have no idea," he answered quickly, not even looking at me. "Then why was he trying to talk to you?" "He probably just picked the wrong person," he snapped, and that answer hurt more than any physical blow. The girl didn't take a single step back, pleased with his reaction. Her ostentatious kindness toward him seemed cloying and cheap to me, but he merely nodded obediently, accepting this closeness. She was so gentle that it made me feel sick. I looked at her and felt only a dull irritation turning into hatred. She seemed incredibly annoying to me. But when she was a few steps away from me, I suddenly felt a strange chill run through my skin and an involuntary shudder. "In the future, I won't talk to any girl, I swear," he told her, and he wasn't talking to me. Girls in this world seemed powerful and dangerous to him. He put his arm around her shoulders, demonstrating complete trust, and they walked away together, leaving me standing in the middle of the noisy street. I watched them go their retreating backs, and the wind carried a fragment of her words to me. She called me annoying and disgusting. "Don't be sad, attacker," the system's voice whispered sarcastically in my head. "When you were in his place, you treated him exactly the same way." It was a cruel reminder, a mockery of my self-pity. The system mercilessly shoved my past in my face, forcing me to realize that I was merely reaping the fruits I had once sown. Was I even worthy of finding him? I knew I was secretive, selfish, and broken. She, the other one, was now infinitely distant from me, reliably protecting him from my attempts to get closer. She would never again allow me to love him the way I wanted. But despite this wall, despite the fact that he didn't recognize me and even hated me at first sight, I realized the most important thing: I won't back down. I will protect him even if he didn't ask for it, and I will learn from her, learn to be there for him, so that when the right moment comes, when the masks fall, he will see me not as an annoying girl, but as someone who is ready to do anything for him.